Captain Junho Kim stood in the middle of the alien ship bridge and felt like he was dreaming. The walls around him glowed with soft blue light that seemed to come from inside the metal itself. Strange symbols moved across smooth surfaces like living things. The air smelled different here too, like rain on hot summer rocks back on Earth 6 months ago. He had been fixing broken pipes on Mars Colony 7. Now he was the captain of the most powerful ship in the galaxy. It still felt impossible. When he thought about it, the aliens had chosen him not because he was smart or brave, but because he had done something they could not understand. He had saved one of their people when he could have easily walked away. The ship was called Starweaver in human language, but its real name was a sound that hurt human throats to make. It was 3 miles long and shaped like a giant crystal that had been carved by artists. The engines made no noise, but Junho could feel their power humming through the floor under his feet. This one ship could probably destroy entire fleets, but right now it was just sitting still and empty. Space waiting Thane walked up to him with the careful steps that all Valkyrie used when they were worried. His blue skin looked almost purple under the bridge lights, and his large black eyes reminded Junho of a scared child. Thane was actually 300 years old and had been fighting wars since before humans discovered fire, but he still looked young by his people standards. The Valkyrie were tall and thin, with arms that were too long for their bodies. Their hands had 6 fingers each, and they could see colors that humans had no names for. They were also some of the kindest people Junho had ever met, which made it extra sad that the hegemony wanted to kill them all. Thane stopped next to the captain chair and looked out at the stars through the huge window that took up most of the front wall. His voice was soft like wind through trees. Human Junho, the council has sent another message. They say we must return to the fleet immediately. The enemy patrols are getting closer to our position. Every day Junho did not look away from the stars ahead. He knew exactly how many enemy ships were in nearby sectors. The ship computer told him everything, but he did not care. We are not leaving, he said in the same tone he used to use when telling workers to fix broken equipment. I gave my word, and humans keep their word. The problem was his sister, Jin, and she was dying down in the medical bay. She had volunteered for a mission that no one thought she could survive, and now alien poison was eating her body from the inside. The doctors had tried everything they knew, but human bodies were different from alien bodies. The medicine that worked for other species just made humans sicker. Dr. Kava had explained it to Junho 3 times, but he still did not really understand the science. The poison came from plants that grew only on enemy worlds. It attacked the nervous system and shut down organs one by one. Most species died in hours, but humans could fight it for days or even weeks. Their bodies were too stubborn to give up easily. Jin had been fighting for 6 days now. She was winning, but barely. The doctors said she had maybe a week left before her body could not fight anymore. There was only one cure, and it grew on the enemy homeworld, in gardens that no outsider had ever seen. The hegemony guarded their homeworld like it was made of pure gold. 3 days ago, his sister best friend So Young Park had volunteered to steal the cure. She had taken a small fast ship and disappeared into hyperspace, heading for the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. Most people thought she was crazy, but Junho knew better. So Young was stubborn in the way that only humans could be. When someone she loved was in trouble, she became unstoppable. Other aliens on the ship could not understand why Junho refused to leave this position. They thought he was being emotional and stupid. Their own people would have calculated the odds and made the logical choice to retreat. But humans did not work that way. When family was involved, humans stopped thinking with their heads and started thinking with their hearts. Thane tried again. Captain, the enemy fleet that destroyed the Shithral colony is only 2 sectors away. If they detect us here, we will not be able to escape. The Starweaver is powerful, but not powerful enough to fight 300 ships alone. Junho finally turned to look at the alien officer. Thane had become a good friend over the past months. He was brave and smart, and he cared about his crew, but he was not human, and he could not understand what Junho was feeling. How many of your people have you lost to the hegemony? He asked. The question made Thane look down at the floor. His people had been fighting this war for 50 years. They had lost billions of lives and dozens of worlds. The hegemony killed anyone who would not surrender and enslaved the rest. Thane's own family had died when his homeworld was destroyed. Too many, he whispered then. You should understand why I cannot leave, Junho said. If So Young was one of your people and she was risking her life to save someone you loved, would you abandon her? Thane was quiet for a long time. The bridge crew worked around them, checking sensors and monitoring communications, but everyone was listening to the conversation. They all knew that their captain decision could get them all killed, but they also knew that he would never change his mind. The Valkyrie had been watching humans for months. Now, trying to understand what made them different from other species, they had seen human soldiers fight impossible battles and win. They had watched human engineers fix problems that should have been unsolvable. They had seen human doctors save patients that other species would have given up on, but this was different. This was not about winning battles or solving problems. This was about something deeper, something that other species had forgotten during their long climb to the stars. It was about the promises people made to each other and what those promises meant. Finally, Thane looked up at his captain. Your friend has been gone for 3 days. The enemy homeworld is surrounded by fleets and defense stations, even if she somehow managed to land on the planet alive. The gardens she needs to reach are inside the Imperial Palace. No one has ever broken into that place and lived to tell about it. Junho smiled, but it was a sad smile that did not reach his eyes. You are probably right, he said. But you do not know So Young. She grew up in the maintenance tunnels of Mars Colony 7. She learned to fix things that were supposed to be unfixable and to find ways into places that were supposed to be locked forever. If anyone can do this, it is her. The ship computer made a soft sound that meant incoming message. A young Valkyrie officer turned from her station. Captain, we are receiving a transmission from the medical bay. Dr. Kava says that hygiene condition is getting worse. She wants to speak with you. Junho closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, Thane could see something in them that he had never seen in any other species' eyes. It was not hope exactly, and it was not fear. It was something harder and more dangerous. It was the look of someone who would rather die than break a promise. Tell Dr. Kava I will be there in a few minutes, he said. Then he looked at Thane one more time. We wait for So Young to come home. That is what humans do. We wait for each other no matter how long it takes and no matter what the cost. The alien captain nodded slowly. He still did not understand, but he was beginning to realize that understanding was not the point. Some things could not be explained with logic or mathematics. Some things just had to be felt, and humans felt things more deeply than any other species in the galaxy. As Junho walked toward the medical bay to see his dying sister, the crew watched him go. They were all aliens from different worlds and different species, but they had all chosen to follow this human captain into danger, and now they were beginning to understand why. So Young Park floated in the pilot seat of her tiny stealth ship and tried not to think about how tired she was. Her eyes burned from staring at screens for 3 days straight, and her hands shook from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. The ship was so small that she could touch both walls if she stretched out her arms, but it was fast and nearly invisible to enemy sensors outside. Her window, the asteroid field around Zarian Prime, looked like a graveyard of broken moons, chunks of rock the size of buildings drifted slowly through space, some of them glowing with strange minerals that hurt to look at directly. The asteroids had been here for millions of years, left over from when the hegemony had destroyed the planets that used to orbit this star. So Young had been hiding in this field for 6 hours, now drifting between the larger rocks and studying the patrol patterns of the enemy ships. She had turned off her engines completely and was using only the tiny maneuvering thrusters to move around. The ship was cold now because she had also shut down the heaters, but cold was better than dead. Through her telescope she could see Zarian Prime hanging in space like a giant red eye. The planet was covered in cities that glowed with artificial light, and the space around it crawled with more warships than she had ever seen in one place. The hegemony kept their homeworld protected like it was the most valuable thing in the universe, and maybe it was. According to the intelligence reports that Thane had given her, the planet had never been successfully invaded in 10,000 years of galactic history. 3 different alliances had tried, and all of them had been destroyed before they even reached the outer defenses. The orbital platforms alone had enough firepower to crack moons, and there were hundreds of them arranged in perfect geometric patterns around the planet, but no one had ever tried to sneak in alone before. Armies were easy to detect, but one small ship drifting like space junk might be able to slip through the cracks in their defenses. So Young had studied the patrol routes for weeks, and she thought she had found a way in. It was insane and would probably get her killed, but Hyjin was dying, and that made insane look reasonable. The plan was simple in the way that all terrible plans were simple. She would drift her ship close to one of the automated cargo haulers that brought supplies to the planet. Then she would attach her ship to the hauler's hull using magnetic clamps and ride it down through the atmosphere. The cargo ships were scanned, but only for weapons and contraband, not for tiny ships stuck to their outside. The hard part would come after she reached the surface. The compounds she needed grew in the Imperial Gardens, which were located in the center of the capital city. The gardens were surrounded by energy barriers that could cut through starship armor and guarded by the hegemony's elite soldiers who had never lost a single battle in their entire history. So Young had no military training and no special equipment. She was just a maintenance worker from Mars who had learned to fix broken things and squeeze through spaces that were too small for other people. But she had something that the hegemony did not expect. She had nothing left to lose, and that made her more dangerous than any army. She checked her equipment one more time. The stealth suit she wore was borrowed from the Valkyrie Resistance, and it could bend light around her body, making her nearly invisible. The energy cutter on her belt could slice through most metals, and the small gravity generator would let her walk on walls or ceilings if she needed to. She also had a week worth of food, pills, and a water recycler that would keep her alive for days. The most important thing she carried was a sample container that looked like a simple metal box but was actually made from materials that cost more than most starships it could keep. The healing compound stable for weeks even in the vacuum of space. Without it, the whole mission would be pointless because the compound would decay into useless chemicals within hours of being picked. A cargo hauler appeared on her sensors, moving slowly toward the planet. It was huge and ugly, like a flying warehouse with engines bolted to the back. So Young fired her maneuvering thrusters and began to drift toward it. The timing had to be perfect because the hauler would only be close enough. For a few minutes, her ship bumped gently against the cargo vessel's hull, and she quickly activated the magnetic clamps that would hold her in place. The hauler did not even notice the tiny additional weight and continued on its course toward the planet. So Young felt her stomach drop as they began to fall through space toward the glowing surface below. The entry into the atmosphere was rough, and her little ship shook like a leaf in a storm. The cargo hauler groaned and creaked around her, but its shields protected both vessels from the heat of re-entry. So Young watched through her window as the planet's surface grew larger and larger, until she could make out individual buildings and roads. The Imperial City spread out below them like a circuit board made of light and metal. It was perfectly organized with straight roads and identical buildings arranged in precise patterns. At the center of it all stood the Imperial Palace, a massive structure that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of black stone. The palace was surrounded by gardens that glowed with their own inner light. So Young waited until the cargo hauler was only a few hundred feet above the ground before she released the magnetic clamps and fired her thrusters. Her ship dropped away from the hauler, and she guided it toward a dark area outside the city where broken buildings provided cover. The landing was hard, and she felt her teeth rattle, but the ship held together. She sat in the darkness for a few minutes, listening to the alien sounds of the planet outside. Night creatures made noises that sounded like metal being torn apart, and the wind carried smells that made her nose burn. The air was thick and humid like a jungle, but with and chemical taste that reminded her of engine fuel. When she was sure that no one had detected her landing, So Young put on her stealth suit and checked all her equipment one more time. The compound she needed would only bloom under the light of 3 moons, and according to her calculations, all 3 moons would be visible in about 4 hours. She had that long to cross 15 miles of enemy territory and break into the most secure location in the galaxy. The stealth suit hummed to life around her, and she watched her hands disappear as the light bending technology activated. She opened the ship hatch and stepped out onto the surface of the enemy homeworld. The ground was covered in some kind of crystalline sand that crunched under her feet and glowed faintly where she stepped. In the distance, the Imperial City rose like a mountain of lights, as she could see the palace gardens glowing at its heart. Somewhere in those gardens was the plant that could save Hyjin life, and So Young was going to get it, even if she had to fight through every guard on the planet. She began walking toward the city, thinking about her friend lying in the medical bay fighting for her life. She thought about Jun-ho waiting in space, risking his ship and crew because he had given his word. She thought about all the people depending on her to do the impossible. Other species would have calculated the odds and given up before they started, but So Young was human, and humans had never been good at accepting impossible odds. When someone they loved was in danger, they found ways to do things that should not be possible. They fought harder, they thought faster, and they refused to give up even when everything looked hopeless. The city lights grew brighter as she walked, and she could hear the sounds of traffic and machinery in the distance. Soon she would be inside enemy territory with nowhere to run and no backup plan. But she smiled as she walked because she knew something that the hegemony did not know. She knew that humans were at their most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. Space around Zarian Prime exploded into activity like an angry hive of metal wasps. Hundreds of hegemony warships launched from orbital platforms and hidden bases, their engines burning bright against the darkness. Each ship was a masterpiece of destruction, capable of turning planets into dust, and they were all hunting for one small human in a stolen ship. Commander Vex stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Wrath, and watched the tactical display with growing fury. In 30 years of service to the hegemony, he had never failed to capture an enemy. No one had ever stolen from the Imperial Gardens and lived to escape the homeworld, but somehow a single human had done both. The tactical officer turned from his station commander. "We have located the intruder ship. It is moving through the asteroid field at maximum velocity, heading for the hyperspace jump point. Our fleet has it surrounded, but it is using the asteroids for cover." Vex studied the display with the cold calculation that had made him the Empire's most feared hunter. The human was clever, he had to admit. Using the asteroids would make it difficult for the larger ships to target her without destroying valuable resources. But cleverness would not be enough against the might of 300 warships. "Launch all fighters," he ordered. "Send patrol groups Alpha through Gamma to block the hyperspace routes. Deploy the gravity mines throughout the asteroid field. I want that human captured alive so we can learn how she broke through our defenses." So Young felt her ship shake as another blast from a hegemony fighter scorched past her hull. The little stealth vessel had not been built for combat, and its shields were already failing under the constant barrage. She twisted between two large asteroids, using their bulk to block the enemy fire, but more ships appeared ahead of her. Her hands moved over the controls with the quick precision of someone who had spent years fixing broken machinery under pressure. The ship responded like a living thing, weaving through space in patterns that made no sense to the hegemony computers. Their targeting systems kept trying to predict where she would go next, but humans did not fly the way other species did. A squadron of fighters appeared directly in her path, their weapons already charging. So Young did something that no sane pilot would attempt. She flew directly at them, not slowing down at all. The fighters scattered, thinking she was going to ram them, but at the last second she fired her ventral thrusters and slipped under their formation. The maneuver put tremendous stress on her ship's hull, and she heard metal groaning under the strain. But it worked. The fighters crashed into each other as they tried to avoid her ship, and she was through their line before they could regroup. Behind her, explosions lit up the asteroid field as the destroyed fighters added to the debris. Vex watched the display in disbelief. How did she do that? He demanded. The computers show that maneuver as impossible. The stress should have torn her ship apart. The tactical officer checked his readings again. "Commander, the human ship appears to be making modifications to its systems during flight. Our sensors detect jury-rigged improvements to the engines and structural reinforcements that should not be possible to install without a full maintenance bay." Vex felt something he had not experienced in years: uncertainty. This human was not fighting like a trained pilot or following any tactical doctrine. He recognized she was improvising solutions that should not work but somehow did. It was like watching someone rewrite the laws of physics in real time. "Launch the heavy cruisers," he ordered. "Position them at points Alpha 7 through Delta 3. If she wants to reach hyperspace, she will have to go through them. And activate the stellar disruptor. If we cannot capture her, we will make sure she never leaves this system." The stellar disruptor was a weapon that the hegemony had built around their homeworld as a final defense. It could create artificial gravity wells that would prevent any ship from jumping to hyperspace, turning the entire system into a prison. But using it would also trap their own fleet. Until the weapon could be shut down, So Young saw the massive cruisers moving into position ahead of her and knew that her luck was running out. The ships were each the size of a small city, and their weapons could vaporize her ship with a single shot. She had maybe 10 minutes before they completed their formation and blocked all possible escape routes. Her ship computer was flashing warnings about engine overload and structural damage, but she ignored them and pushed the throttles even further forward. The asteroid field around her became a blur of stone and metal as she rocketed toward the cruiser line at speeds that should have been impossible for such a small vessel. The first cruiser opened fire when she was still 5 miles away. Its main batteries lit up space with energy beams that could cut through battleship armor, but So Young was not flying in straight lines anymore. She was spinning and rolling and changing direction so quickly that the ship's computer kept losing target lock. She flew under the cruiser, massive hull using its own bulk to shield her from the other ships. The cruiser could not fire its main weapons at her without hitting itself, so it launched swarms of small interceptor drones instead. The drones were fast and maneuverable, but they were also predictable. So Young had learned to deal with swarms of small, fast-moving objects. Back on Mars Colony 7, where maintenance drones would attack anyone who entered restricted areas without authorization, she led the interceptor drones into the cruiser engine wash, where the superheated plasma destroyed them in seconds. But more cruisers were moving to block her path, and she could see the hyperspace jump point shimmering in the distance like a mirage. She was so close to escape, but there were still 3 massive ships between her and freedom. Their combined firepower could destroy a small moon. The ships opened fire simultaneously, filling space with enough energy to power a star. So Young watched the death coming toward her and felt time slow down the way it did in the most dangerous moments. She thought about Haijin dying in the medical bay and about Junho waiting for her to come home. Then she did something that no military computer would have calculated as possible. She flew directly into the energy barrage, not around it or under it, but right through the middle where the beams intersected. The combined energies created a momentary gap in space-time, a tiny wormhole that lasted for less than a second. So Young's ship shot through the gap and emerged on the other side of the cruiser formation, battered and smoking, but still intact. The hegemony computers had no explanation for what had just happened because it was not supposed to be possible. According to every law of physics they knew, she reached the hyperspace jump point and felt her ship engines engage with a sound like thunder. The stars around her began to stretch and blur as reality folded in on itself, but just before the jump completed, she sent a message back to the hegemony fleet. "Tell your commander that humans keep their promises," she transmitted. And then she was gone. Vex stood on his bridge staring at empty space where the impossible human had been. His tactical officers were running diagnostics on their sensors, convinced that their equipment had malfunctioned, but Vex knew better. He had just witnessed something that would change how the hegemony thought about humans forever. In his report to the Imperial Council, he would write that the human had escaped through superior technology or luck, but he knew the truth was more disturbing. The human had succeeded not because she was better equipped or better trained, but because she thought in ways that hegemony computers could not predict. She fought like someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain, and that made her more dangerous than any weapon the Empire had ever faced. For the first time in his career, Commander Vex felt something that no hegemony officer was supposed to feel. He felt afraid, not of dying in battle, but of facing an enemy that could not be understood or predicted. An enemy that would do impossible things for reasons that made no logical sense. An enemy that kept their promises no matter what the cost. Junho stood in the medical bay watching the numbers on the monitor screens drop lower with each passing hour. His sister Haijin lay still on the medical bed, her skin pale as starlight, and her breathing so shallow that sometimes he had to lean close just to make sure she was still alive. The alien poison was winning its battle against her human immune system. Dr. Kava moved between the various machines that surrounded the bed, adjusting settings and checking readings with the quiet efficiency of someone who had seen too much death. His 6 arms worked independently, each one performing a different task, while his large eyes remained fixed on the patient vital signs. The Catherine doctor had been working without rest for 4 days, trying every treatment in his considerable knowledge, but human biology was different from the species he usually treated. The medicine that saved other races made humans sicker, and the procedures that worked on alien physiology could kill a human in minutes. Junho, we have tried everything I know, the doctor said in his soft, clicking voice. His translator made the words sound mechanical, but the emotion behind them was clear. The poison is designed to attack neural pathways in ways that our medicine cannot counter. Without the antidote compound, she has perhaps 6 hours remaining. 6 hours, Junho thought about. So young, somewhere in enemy space, probably dead or captured by now. It had been 4 days since she left for her impossible mission. 4 days of waiting and hoping while his sister fought a losing battle against alien toxins that were eating her nervous system. The medical bay door opened and Thane entered, followed by 2 other Valkyrie officers. Their blue faces were grave and their large eyes held the weight of bad news. Junho could read their expression before they spoke. He had seen that look before on the faces of supervisors who had to tell workers that their friends had died in mining accidents. Captain Thane said, "Formally, we have received word from our scouts. A massive hegemony battle fleet is approaching this sector. They will be here in less than 3 hours. We must retreat immediately or face certain destruction." Junho looked at his sister's pale face, and then at the alien officers who had become his friends over the past months. They were good people who deserved to live, but they were asking him to make a choice that no human should have to choose between saving his sister and saving his crew. "How many ships are coming?" he asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. The lead scout estimates over 200 warships, including 3 dreadnoughts, Thane replied. "Our intelligence suggested they are searching for something or someone. The fleet composition indicates a major military operation, not a simple patrol." Junho closed his eyes and tried to think clearly, but his mind kept returning to the promise he had made to So Young that he would wait for her return. He had given his word, and humans did not break their promises, even when keeping them meant death. The other Valkyrie officer stepped forward. "Captain, with respect, your friend has been gone for 4 days. The enemy homeworld is impossible to infiltrate, and even more impossible to escape. If she were still alive, she would have returned by now, or at least sent some signal, but she had not sent any signal, and that could mean anything. Maybe she was dead, maybe she was captured, maybe she was still fighting her way through enemy territory with the healing compound that could save Haijin. But maybe it was not enough to risk 200 lives on." Junho opened his eyes and looked at the faces around him. These aliens had chosen to follow him into danger because they believed he was different from other species leaders. They had seen humans do impossible things, and they trusted him to do the same. But what if this time the impossible was simply impossible? Captain Thane said gently, "Your sister would not want you to sacrifice the ship and crew for her. She would want you to save as many lives as possible. That is what any rational person would choose." Rational, Junho almost laughed at the word. Humans were not rational when it came to family. They were emotional and stubborn and willing to die for people they loved. That was what made them human, but it was also what made them dangerous to themselves and others. He walked to the medical bay window and looked out at the stars, thinking about all the decisions that had brought them to this moment. If he ordered the ship to retreat now, they would probably escape the hegemony fleet and live to fight another day. But So Young would return to find empty space, and his sister would die within hours. If he waited for So Young to return, they would all probably die when the enemy fleet arrived. But there was a chance, however small, that she would make it back in time with the compound that could save Haijin, a chance that his promise would mean something. The problem was that keeping his promise might get everyone else killed, and breaking it might save them all. It was the kind of choice that military commanders faced in war, but Junho was not a military commander. He was a maintenance worker who had been given responsibility for lives. He had never asked to lead. Diarkava spoke from beside the medical bed. "Captain, I must tell you that even if your friend returns with the compound, there is no guarantee it will work. The poison has been in her system for many days now, and the damage may be too extensive to repair. So even if So Young performed a miracle and escaped from the most heavily defended world in the galaxy. There was no certainty that Hyjin could be saved. The logical choice was clear retreat now and save the people who could still be saved. But humans had never been good at making logical choices. When love was involved, Junho turned back to the others and saw them waiting for his decision. Their faces showed respect and loyalty, but also fear. They trusted him to make the right choice, but they were afraid that his human emotions would overcome his judgment. Captain Thane tried one more time. Perhaps we could leave a message beacon for your friend. If she returns, she will know where to find us. The hegemony might not detect a simple beacon. And no, Junho interrupted, his voice firm. We wait. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. The Valkyrie officers exchanged glances, but none of them argued further. They had learned that when humans made these kinds of decisions, argument was useless. Human stubbornness was a force of nature that could not be reasoned with. Thane nodded slowly. Very well, Captain. But I must ask why. Why risk so many lives for one person who may already be dead? Why keep a promise that may have already been broken by circumstances beyond your control? Junho looked at his sister's dying face and then at the alien crew members who had become his family. He thought about So Young flying through enemy space with nothing but determination and hope. He thought about what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of logical species who had forgotten how to care about each other, because that is what humans do. He said simply, we keep our promises even when it kills us. We wait for each other even when waiting seems hopeless. We choose love over logic and hope over fear, and sometimes that makes us heroes and sometimes it makes us fools, but it always makes us human. The medical bay fell silent, except for the soft beeping of machines and the distant hum of the ship engines. Everyone was thinking about the choice they had made and the price they might pay for it, but no one suggested changing course. 2 hours later, the first enemy ships appeared on their sensors. Long-range scanners showed the approaching fleet like a wall of death moving toward them through space. Junho stood on the bridge watching the tactical display and trying not to think about how many ways they were all about to die. Then the communications officer turned from her station. Captain, I am detecting a hyperspace signature. Someone is coming out of jump space directly ahead. Junho held his breath as a small, battered ship materialized in front of them. Its hull was scorched by weapons fire, and one of its engines was trailing plasma, but it was intact and it was broadcasting. So Young voice, sorry I am late, she said over the communication channel. Traffic was murder out there. Hope I did not keep you waiting too long. For the first time in days, Junho smiled. The Imperial Gardens of Zarian Prime had never been breached in their 10,000-year history. The energy barriers that surrounded them hummed with enough power to vaporize starships, and the guard towers were filled with sensors that could detect a single grain of sand moving in the wrong direction. The hegemony kept their most precious treasures here, under artificial suns that never set. So Young crouched in the shadows outside the garden's outer wall and studied the patrol patterns through her suit visor. The guards moved like clockwork, every step timed to the second and every route planned by computers that never made mistakes. They were not just soldiers but cyborgs with metal parts replacing flesh and electronic brains that processed information faster than any living creature could think. But So Young had grown up in the maintenance tunnels of Mars Colony 7, where she had learned that every system had flaws if you knew where to look. The designers of these defenses had made them perfect against armies and fleets, but they had never considered someone like her, someone who thought like a mechanic instead of a soldier. The first barrier was an energy wall that rose 50 feet into the air and extended deep underground. Any living thing that touched it would be turned to ash in milliseconds, but So Young had noticed something during her hours of observation. The barrier had tiny gaps where maintenance ports allowed repair drones to pass through. The gaps were only open for 3 seconds every hour. When the drones performed their routine checks, she waited until the next maintenance cycle began and watched as a small port opened in the barrier. A repair drone no bigger than her fist zipped through the gap. To check the energy projectors on the other side, So Young pulled out her energy cutter and quickly modified its setting to match the drone's energy signature. Then she sprinted toward the closing gap. At the last possible second, she dove through the port, feeling the energy barrier singe the air around her. The gap closed behind her with a sound like thunder, but she was Already rolling across the ground on the other side, the repair drone buzzed angrily at her presence, but its simple programming could not understand what had just happened inside the first barrier. So Young found herself in a maze of crystal trees that grew in perfect, geometric patterns. Their branches sparkled with light that hurt her eyes, but she forced herself to keep moving. The guard drones that patrolled here were bigger and smarter than the repair drones, and they would not be fooled by energy signatures. She pulled a handful of small rocks from her equipment pack and began throwing them with careful precision. Each rock was aimed at exactly the right angle to ricochet off the crystal branches and hit the guard drones' sensors. The drones were programmed to investigate any unusual readings, so when their sensors detected movement in the wrong direction, they would fly off to check, leaving gaps in their patrol routes one by one. So Young disabled the guard drones by causing them to crash into each other or fly into the crystal trees. The noise was terrible, but it only lasted for a few seconds, and the gardens were too big for the sound to carry far. She moved through the maze like a ghost, using every shadow and reflection to hide from the remaining sensors. The second barrier was a field of laser beams that crisscrossed the air at random intervals. The beams were invisible to most species, but So Young's stealth suit could detect them and show their paths on her visor display. They moved too fast for most creatures to dodge, but humans had reflexes that had been sharpened by millions of years of avoiding predators. So Young watched the pattern for several minutes, until she understood the timing. Then she began to dance through the laser field, bending and twisting her body to avoid the deadly beams. It was like playing a game she had loved as a child, where you had to move through spinning ropes without getting hit, except now the ropes would cut her in half if she made a mistake. She was halfway through when one of the beams changed direction without warning. So Young threw herself backward and felt the laser pass inches from her face. The beam scorched the ground where she had been standing, and she realized that the field was not completely random. It was designed to learn from intruders and adapt its patterns to catch them, but the designers had made one mistake. They had programmed the field to learn from normal movement patterns, and So Young was not moving normally. She was using techniques she had learned from sneaking past security cameras and motion sensors back on Mars Colony 7 places where she was not supposed to be. She began moving in ways that made no logical sense, stopping in the middle of steps and changing direction for no apparent reason. The laser field tried to predict her next move, but it could not understand movement that had no pattern. Every time it adjusted, she would do something completely different, until finally she reached the other side. The third barrier was a minefield, but not the kind that exploded when you stepped on them. These mines released clouds of poison gas that would kill most species in seconds, but So Young had sealed her stealth suit completely and was breathing recycled air from her life support system. The mines could not hurt her as long as she did not stay in one place too long. She ran across the minefield as gas clouds erupted around her. The poison made rainbow colors in the air that would have been beautiful if they were not deadly. Her suit began to warn her that the seals were weakening, but she was almost through. She dove forward and rolled clear just as the last mine activated behind her. Now she was in the heart of the Imperial Gardens, where the most precious plants in the galaxy grew under domes of pure energy. The silver-leafed plant she needed was easy to spot because it glowed with its own inner light and its leaves moved. Even though there was no wind, the plant grew at the base of a crystal tree that was taller than most buildings. So Young approached carefully, knowing that the final defenses would be the most dangerous. She could see motion sensors and pressure plates hidden among the decorative stones, but she had expected those. What she had not expected were the 3 hegemony soldiers who stepped out from behind the tree. These were not ordinary soldiers, but members of the Imperial Guard who had been enhanced with the best technology the Empire could provide. Their red armor was made from metal that could stop starship weapons, and their helmets contained computers that could predict an enemy's movements before they made them. They had never been defeated in combat, and they were trained to kill without mercy. So Young froze as they approached, knowing that her stealth suit would not hide her from their advanced sensors. One of them spoke in the harsh language of the hegemony, but his suit translated the words into human speech. You will surrender now, or you will die. We know you are here, human, and we know why you came for A moment So Young felt fear try to freeze her muscles. These soldiers were faster and stronger than any human, and they had weapons that could cut through starship armor. But then she thought about Hyjin lying in the medical bay fighting for her life, and the fear turned into something else, something harder and more dangerous. She thought about Junho waiting in space, trusting her to come back. She thought about all the people on the Starweaver who were risking their lives because they believed in her. She thought about every time someone had told her that something was impossible and how she had proven them wrong. The first soldier raised his weapon, but So Young was already moving. She had learned to fight not in military academies, but in colony bars where drunk miners settled arguments with their fists. She had learned dirty tricks and desperate moves that no computer could predict because they made no logical sense. She threw sand in the first soldier's face sensors and kicked the second one in a joint where his armor was weakest. The third soldier fired his weapon, but she was no longer where he expected her to be. She had rolled under his legs and was cutting through his armor with her energy till the fight lasted 30 seconds, when it was over. 3 elite warriors of the hegemony lay unconscious on the ground, defeated by a maintenance worker who had learned to survive in places where survival was not guaranteed. So Young grabbed the glowing plant and ran toward her ship as alarms began to wail across the planet behind her. The Imperial City came alive with lights and sirens, but she was already thinking about the next part of her impossible mission. Getting out was going to be even harder than getting in. But she had something that the hegemony could never understand. She had a promise to keep, and humans never broke their promises, even when keeping them seemed impossible. The healing compound worked like magic, flowing through Hyjin bloodstream and binding to the alien toxins that had been slowly killing her. The change was visible within minutes as color returned to her pale cheeks and her breathing became stronger and more regular. The machines around her bed began showing readings that made Dr. Kava all 6 arms move in what his species considered a dance of joy. So Young sat in the chair beside her friend bed, still wearing her damaged stealth suit and looking like she had been through a war which in many ways her ship had barely held together during the escape from Zarian Prime, and she had spent the entire journey back wondering if she would make it in time. Now she watched as Hyjin eyes fluttered open for the first time in days. The first thing she saw was So Young's smiling face, and the first thing she tried to do was sit up, which made Dr. Kava rush over with worried clicking sounds. "Take it easy," the doctor said through his translator. "You have been very sick, and your body needs time to recover completely. The compound is working, but you must rest and let it finish repairing the damage." Hyjin looked around the medical bay with confused eyes that slowly began to focus and remember where she was. She saw her brother standing at the foot of the bed with tears in his eyes, and she saw the alien medical equipment that had kept her alive while poison tried to destroy her nervous system. "Did you?" she started to ask So Young, but her voice was weak and scratchy from days of unconsciousness. "Got it," So Young replied, holding up the empty sample container. "Turns out breaking into the most secure location in the galaxy is easier than finding parking on Mars Colony 7 despite everything they had been through." Hyjin managed to laugh. It was a weak sound, but it was the most beautiful thing Junho had heard in days. He reached over and took his sister's hand, feeling the warmth that meant life was flowing back into her body. The medical bay door opened and Captain Thane entered with several other crew members who had been waiting anxiously for news about their captain's sister. The Valkyrie leader looked relieved when he saw Hyjin sitting up and talking, but his expression was also thoughtful, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle that had no logical answer. Thane approached the bed and performed the formal bow that his people used to show respect. "So Young Park," he said, "you have accomplished something that every military expert in the galaxy would have declared impossible. How did you succeed where entire fleets have failed?" So Young looked uncomfortable with the formal attention. She was still just a maintenance worker in her own mind, someone who fixed broken things and squeezed through tight spaces to get jobs done. "I got lucky," she said with a shrug, "and the enemy made some mistakes in their security design." But Thane was not satisfied with that answer. He had been studying humans for months now, trying to understand what made them different from other species. He had seen them solve problems that should have been unsolvable and survive situations that should have killed them. This was another piece of the puzzle. Luck does not explain how you infiltrated their homeworld or how you escaped from 300 warships, he said. Mistakes in security do not account for defeating their elite guards in personal combat. There is something else, some factor that we do not understand. Dr. Kava looked up from his medical instruments. His large eyes were bright with curiosity. I have been analyzing the human immune response to the alien toxins, he said. The resistance patterns are unlike anything I have seen in other species. Humans fight biological threats in ways that should not be possible. Junho listened to the conversation and realized that his alien friends were trying to understand something that could not be explained with science or logic. They wanted to know what made humans special, what gave them the ability to do impossible things when other species would give up. The answer was not complicated, but it was difficult for logical minds to accept. Humans succeeded because they refused to accept failure when people they loved were in danger. They fought harder when the odds were against them, and they found solutions that made no sense because they thought with their hearts as well as their minds. Captain Thane said, turning to Junho, your species continues to surprise us every time. We think we understand human capabilities. You do something that changes our assumptions. Why do you succeed where others fail? Junho looked around the medical bay at his sister recovering in bed and his friend who had risked everything to save her. He thought about the crew members who had followed him into danger because he asked them to and about the promise he had made to wait no matter what the cost. We succeed because we care about each other, he said finally. Other species calculate odds and make rational decisions based on logic and probability. But when humans love someone, we stop thinking about what is possible and start thinking about what is necessary. Thane nodded slowly, but his expression showed that he still did not fully understand. The concept of acting against logic for emotional reasons was foreign to most galactic species. They had evolved beyond such primitive thinking, or so they believed. So Young shifted in her chair and winced as her injuries reminded her of the fight in the Imperial Gardens. I did not break into their homeworld because I had superior training or better equipment, she said. I did it because Hyjin needed me to do it. When someone you love is dying, you find ways to do things that should not be possible. Dr. Kava made the clicking sound that indicated deep thought in his species. I begin to understand, he said. You do not fight for victory or glory or even survival. You fight for each other, and that changes the fundamental equation of conflict. Exactly, Junho replied. When hegemony soldiers fight, they follow orders and calculate risks. When humans fight for someone they love, they become unpredictable. They take chances that make no sense and refuse to give up even when defeat is certain. The medical bay fell quiet as the alien crew members absorbed this information. They were beginning to understand why humans had become such a disruptive force in galactic politics. It was not because they were stronger or smarter than other species. It was because they fought for reasons that could not be programmed into computers or predicted by tactical analysis. Hyjin squeezed her brother's hand and looked at So Young with grateful eyes. You could have been killed, she whispered. Why did you take such a terrible risk? For Meso Young smiled and reached over to touch her friend's arm. Because you would have done the same for me, she said simply. Because that is what friends do for each other, because some things are worth any risk. Thane watched this exchange and finally began to understand what made humans so dangerous to their enemies. The hegemony could build bigger ships and train better soldiers, but they could not create the bonds of love and loyalty that drove humans to attempt impossible things. Captain, he said to Junho, I believe I understand now why the hegemony fears your species. It is not your technology or your tactics. It is your willingness to sacrifice everything for each other that makes you unpredictable, and unpredictable enemies are the most dangerous. Qin Junho nodded and looked out the medical bay window at the stars beyond. He thought about all the human ships scattered across the galaxy, carrying refugees and fighters and dreamers who had left their homeworld behind. They were not the strongest species or the smartest, but they had something that others had forgotten. They remembered how to care about each other, how to keep promises even when keeping them seemed impossible, how to hope when hope was foolish. They remembered that some things mattered more than survival, and that love could make ordinary people do extraordinary things. The hegemony could conquer worlds and destroy fleets, but they could never defeat the Simple human truth that people were worth fighting for no matter what the odds. That was why across the galaxy alien ships were learning to wait for humans to come back home.